and gentlemen, may I have your attention for a moment, please? You've all been asked to sit in on a little experiment tonight. We're going to try to build a picture of a face of a man who's cunning, resourceful, and deadly. He's a man who killed a police officer. Now, some of you he held up at the point of a gun. You may have seen his face, remembered something about it. And we want you to tell us exactly what you remembered. Whether it's his hair, eyes, nose, or mouth. And we're going to try to put those pieces together so that they add up into a picture of the face of the man we want. Now, you can see how we're depending on you. Lights. Now, first, we're going to concentrate on the type of hair our man had. And if the picture looks anything like his hair, I want you to speak right up. All right, the first slide.
His hair had waves in it, well groomed.
Is that any closer?
No, it was parted on the side. Oh, that's more like it, except it was thicker. Oh, that's very close.
Yes, that's the way his forehead looked. It was broad and high.
All right, hold that slide. On the next series of slides, we'll take into account his eyes.
Oh, 1 minute, please. Wait, 1 minute. His eyes were a little like that. Maybe a little smaller, like beads. Now you've got it.
Anyone else?
That looks like him, only a little madder.
He had a patch over one eye when he come into my place of business. I remember noticing that the one showing was blue.
Well, the guy that stuck me up had on horn-rimmed glasses.
He was wearing a Band-Aid across his nose when he knocked me over.
Any more comments?
That's pretty close, all right. Pretty close.
Perfect. All right.
Crime stories don't get any better than this. A group of determined citizens help police crack a tough case by putting together a composite sketch of the suspect. Back in 1949, when this film noir was made, it seemed like the cutting edge of scientific detective work. In the real world, it still is. Police sketches or police lineups that rely on the memories of crime victims and eyewitnesses remain important tools in bringing bad people to justice. But just how dependable are they? Here's a troubling fact. Studies by the Innocence Project and others suggest that mistaken eyewitness IDs are the leading cause of wrongful convictions in the U.S. I'm Steve Handelman, host of Criminal Justice Matters. Today, we're taking a look at one of the most painful issues facing our justice system. Are our memories reliable? Let's start with this man. After seeing this photo, could you describe him to your friends accurately? Some people thought they could, and as a result, he spent almost 2 decades in prison for a murder he didn't commit. His name is Fernando Bermudez. One summer evening in 1991, police knocked on the door of his family's apartment in Washington Heights and brought him down to a station house in Greenwich Village. He was questioned for over 12 hours and finally booked for the murder of a young man at a nightclub. Fernando said he never knew the victim, never went to the nightclub. He even had witnesses who supported his story, but it didn't matter. He had been identified as the killer by people at the scene. He was 22 years old. For the next 18 years, he fought from his jail cell to prove his innocence. And almost exactly 2 years ago, Fernando was freed from his long nightmare. And all the judge could tell him was, "I hope you have a much better future."
I was very distraught because here it was. These people who I never saw in my life were lying, were mistaken, were confused. And I knew I had nothing to do with this crime, yet they were here, stating what they were saying, and I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience, like it wasn't even me who was experiencing this misidentification. I was facing 22 years to life, and it felt like a marathon that I could not win. I was very depressed in prison, living in a 6-by-9-foot cell, incessant noise around me, the humiliation of being strip searched upon seeing my family who lived 6 hours away, for the high moments of being able to see them with happiness, to the low moments of that reality, and so much else just made me depressed, and I considered suicide, the ideation of which had me experiencing delusions within my cell. But I started praying, and I started writing, becoming proactive, and reaching out to as many attorneys in the hopes that I would obtain pro bono counsel to assist me.
Jeffrey Diskovic has made it his life's work to make sure such cases don't happen again. He's been there himself. Now completing his master's at John Jay College, Jeffrey was imprisoned for 16 years for rape and a murder he didn't commit. After being freed on DNA evidence, Jeffrey won a lawsuit brought against New York State. He has used part of his settlement to create the Jeffrey Diskovic Foundation for Justice to help the wrongfully convicted. Jeff, welcome to Criminal Justice Matters.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
How serious a problem is wrongful ID or misidentification?
It's the leading cause of wrongful conviction, having been the cause of 75% of the country's 280 DNA-proven wrongful convictions. While I was incarcerated wrongfully myself, there were at least 3 people who were alleged that they were wrongfully convicted based upon misidentification, whose exonerations were later established in the court of law.
But why is it that the people that you've talked to when you were in prison, did they feel it was the main reason why they were there and that they were thus lost forever, they were never going to be able to get out?
There was no question that they felt that it was the main reason that they were there. However, they did believe that they would be able to obtain justice, which is what enabled them to keep fighting.
I mean, what's the problem here? Why do we have so many people who are in prison because of wrongful IDs? Is it a problem of our justice system? Is it a problem of the courts, the police?
It's largely a problem of the procedure in which we conduct the lineups or photo arrays. First of all, memory is very fallible. Factors that can lead to misidentifications have included stress, lighting, the length of time that a person may be viewed. In addition, the person may be making a comparison, comparing one suspect or one person who's in a photo array to their memory, as opposed to trying to make the selection based purely off of their memory. The police may either intentionally or unintentionally give cues and clues, which facilitates an identification.
Such as?
Well, that's making a remark to the witness or the victim that you selected the guy. That's who we thought it was. Or if the photograph or person in the lineup, if he looks substantively different than the other people, then that would be an obvious identification.
And what does your foundation do? Do you try to get these guys out, or just tell their story so more people hear about it?
The Jeffrey Diskovic Foundation for Justice seeks to exonerate prisoners who are wrongfully convicted, both in cases that have DNA, and more importantly in cases that don't have DNA, since it's only around in 10 to 12% of all serious felony cases. So we try to unearth previously unknown evidence of innocence, which can then form the legal challenge to the conviction.
Do you have a caseload of folks who are in prison in New York State because of wrongful IDs?
Yes, we have 4 cases that we're currently working on, which involve misidentification.
Tell us a bit about them.
Okay, one person was who was misidentified. There was an alternative suspect at the scene who was a spitting image of him, and in addition, the alternative suspect had access to a car in which a knife was removed and used to commit the crime. Whereas in the identification itself, our client was the only person in the photo array that had a black eye. So obviously that's very suggestive.
This is tougher in a way, isn't it? I mean, we're accustomed to how DNA can exonerate a person, but in many of these cases, DNA doesn't operate. So it's a lot tougher to get these guys, or they're all guys, I assume, out of prison.
Quickly, there have been women who've been wrongfully incarcerated also, just in general, and have been cleared. We don't have any in our caseload, but there's no doubt that they're out there. Yes, it is more difficult. However, it can be done. Some of the methods include investigating an alternative suspect, investigating similar crimes in a nearby geographical area, reviewing a case file. Sometimes exculpatory evidence has either been accidentally or intentionally not turned over to the defense, the exposure of junk science, misidentification, recantations. All these are just but a few methods that are available.
You mentioned junk science. Now, do you think this is a question of bad faith on the part of police and the courts, or is this just the kind of mistakes we make in a generation that's used to watching Law and Order and all the other shows that we're used to about seeing how perfect science is?
I think it's a combination. You'd have to go case by case. I think that at times good faith errors are made, and at other times it's not a good faith error. For example, earlier on the show, you had Mr. Bermudez in here, and when the tape was rolling to show the photo array, before the officers even opened up the folder and spread out the photographs, the witness asked him a question, saying, "It's number 2, right?" So it's kind of obvious, where did he know that from if they didn't have a discussion and the procedure wasn't rigged?
Jeff, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Eyewitness ID is now high on the criminal justice reform agenda. In August, the New Jersey Supreme Court established new ground rules for handling eyewitness cases in what many considered a landmark decision. And last month, the U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments in another case involving eyewitness testimony, which could further change how our system deals with the imperfect science of memory. To discuss the court cases and their implications, joining us are two of the nation's leading scholars in the field of wrongful convictions and eyewitness testimony. Professor Jennifer Dysart and Professor Matthew Johnson teach in the psychology department at John Jay College. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Science so far seems to be well ahead of the courts on this issue. Am I right? Jennifer?
Yes, I would agree that science is far ahead of the courts. On the eyewitness identification issue, the last time that the U.S. Supreme Court heard an eyewitness identification case was June 1977. So it's been some time prior to just a few weeks ago.
So what are the issues that are now before the courts, Professor Johnson?
With regard to eyewitness identification,
Yes.
well, there are several issues that are before the courts. I guess the key issue really has to do with how much the courts have to actually oversee and monitor eyewitness identification evidence, and what are the proper ways for that to be done. And there are a variety of aspects that involves. One of the things that occurs to me in regard to the Bermudez case, because I reviewed his interview earlier today, was that his case is pointed out as a case where there was eyewitness error. And not only was it eyewitness error, but apparently it was eyewitness error by 5 different witnesses. So what accounts for that? And there are a variety of things that contribute to that. So I think that one of the things that the courts need to recognize is that eyewitness error, there are a variety of sources of eyewitness error, and they need to be examined carefully in all cases.
But a lot of it seems to be limited to court procedure or police procedure. But do both of you think that goes far enough that the courts themselves are going to take us much further on the road to deciding whether memories are reliable to begin with in terms of convicting the guilty?
Well, the Supreme Court is not going to consider those other factors other than police procedures, I think, for some time. But we do know that even if the best procedures are used, the current best practices are used, that eyewitnesses make mistakes still at a very, very high rate. There was a recent field study published looking at real witnesses and real identifications, and what we know is from even the best procedures that we recommend, that is double-blind administration, where the officer who's conducting the procedure doesn't know who the suspect is, and the sequential presentation, and that's the images or the people are presented one at a time, still results in about a 30% error in choices. That is, in real cases, real eyewitnesses who make a positive identification of someone from that identification procedure, 30% pick a filler. That is a stand-in, not to be the suspect. That's still a very, very high rate. So how do we explain how that many witnesses in real cases can be erroneous? Then we turn to all of the other factors that we know influence memory in general. How good a view did they have? Was there a long period of delay between the crime and when the identification took place? Was it a cross-race identification? Were weapons present in the commission of the crime? And the Supreme Court and other court decisions are not really spending much time focusing on the quality of the memory issue.
It gets particularly complicated. You mentioned race. When you think about people identifying a suspect, particularly if they're of one race and they're identifying a suspect of another race, and you did some studies about that, if I recall.
Well, going back to the work that I'm looking at now, I'm looking at wrongful convictions in sexual assault cases. And as you can imagine, some cases involved a victim and a defendant who were of the same race, but others involved the victim and the defendant of different races. And where cross-racial identification is a factor, you have an increased likelihood of there being errors. In New Jersey, there was